This is a presentation of the Center for Advanced Study at the University of Illinois. For over 50 years, the Center for Advanced Study has brought together scholars from diverse disciplines and backgrounds, encouraging and rewarding excellence in all areas of academic inquiry at Illinois, one of the nation's premier public universities. For more information about this presentation and other center activities, please visit cas.illinois.edu.
I'm Jane Desmond, Professor of Anthropology and the Resident Faculty Associate at the Center this year, convener of the Knowing Animals Initiative. I see some of you in the audience that I've seen at some of our events, performances, and lectures all season, and I thank you for your support and for returning. I also thank my advisory team of faculty from across the university and support from so many parts of the campus, including the law school, the vet school, ACES, College of Fine Arts, and the superb staff of the Center for Advanced Study for making this series possible, especially Deputy Director Dr. Masumi Urie and Head of Publicity and Public Events Liesl Wildhagen. Additional thanks, and it's really important to give these thanks because, you know, we're struggling with our economy here, and without this collaboration from across the campus, we can't do big things. So I really mean it when I say thanks to the Departments of Anthropology, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of Animal Studies, and the Institute for Genomic Biology. And for today's lecture, we are also especially indebted to the College of Veterinary Medicine and to Dr. Mark Mitchell for helping to make this visit possible. Our guest today spent all yesterday at the vet school and all day today on our part of the campus. I'm sorry to say that our next scheduled event, a visit by anthropologist Dr. Barbara King, scheduled for next week, has been canceled due to illness. I apologize for that. Some of you may still want to encounter her ideas by reading her new, wonderful, and widely accessible book from Doubleday titled Being with Animals, Why We Are Obsessed with the Furry, Scaly, Feathered Creatures Who Populate Our World. So I direct you to the book because she won't physically be able to be with us. But we do have another public event coming up next month, and I hope you'll join us again right here, same time, same place, for an important lecture by Andrew Rowan, President of the Humane Society International, who will discuss international conservation efforts. In fact, that lecture will dovetail with our presentation today by distinguished scholar, researcher, and veterinarian Dr. Mark Stetter, who I am proud to say is also an alumni of our university of the Vet Med program, graduating in 1988, from which he received his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. From there, he continued his training at the Audubon Zoo and the Aquarium of the Americas in New Orleans, followed by a residency and then staff appointment in Zoo Med at the Bronx Zoo and Wildlife Conservation Society in New York, and ultimately taking his current position as head of animal health and environmental initiatives at the Disney Animal Kingdom in Florida. Dr. Stetter is one of only about 125 board-certified zoo and wildlife specialists in the entire world, so it's an honor to welcome him here. And he's conducted research and conservation projects not only in the U.S., but abroad. His special interests lie in the application of advanced technologies to zoo and wildlife medicine, and he has pioneered the introduction of elephant vasectomy projects in Africa as an alternative to herd management through killing. I will leave it to him to tell us, if he wishes, just how one would go about performing a vasectomy on a 2-ton elephant. Please welcome Dr. Stetter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane, and it is wonderful being back here on campus. I graduated from undergrad here in 1984, so many years ago. And I then went to veterinary school here and left veterinary school in 1988 and have been a pretty poor alumni, have been all over the globe and haven't been back to Champaign-Urbana very much. So it's a great opportunity for me to come back, reconnect with the campus and with students, see what has changed and what remains the same. As Jane mentioned, I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about how humans are helping wildlife. And we hear all the time the bad things that humans are doing as far as our negative impacts on wildlife. But there are a variety of things that we are doing from a good perspective that I think many times people are not aware of and don't get much attention. So I'm going to break it into three big areas. And in between each area, I will take any questions that you might have. And also for any of you that are shy, I will be around afterwards, and feel free to come up and ask me any questions that you might have. The first area I really want to focus on is how humans are helping wildlife in captive settings, in zoos and aquariums all over the world, and that zoos and aquariums have become a much bigger role than what they used to when I was growing up, where it was simply displaying animals. Now it's all about taking care of them and the conservation efforts that we have and the research that we do from that perspective. The other way I wanted to chat about is how people that work in the zoo or aquarium business are helping animals all over the globe outside of their area. So my specific project looks at helping elephants and ecosystems in Africa, but there's a huge variety of different ways that people are helping with those efforts. And then lastly, and probably the most unsuspecting but maybe the most important way that we help animals and wildlife is by helping other people and helping other communities and helping connect people with nature, which is ultimately going to be what either saves the planet or does not, that connection between humans and animals. Now I'm going to look really quickly because it occurred to me as I saw this first slide that I have yesterday's presentation up. So I'm going to switch out. Brown bag we don't need, but keynote we do. You guys are in the University of Illinois file. So one thing that I want you guys to have a sense of pride about, and you may not even know, is right here at University of Illinois at the College of Veterinary Medicine, there is a really innovative course that you guys host, and you guys host it, but it is actually carried out every summer all over the world, and that's the EnviroVet course. And it is a really unique course that takes what used to be veterinary medicine, which was how do you take care of individual animals, and connects all the expertise that you learn in veterinary school about animal care and animal disease and animal health, but it looks at an environmental health perspective. So no longer are we thinking about specific individual animals, but we're thinking about the health of an entire ecosystem, and how do you get veterinarians to think about that whole project. So EnviroVet happens every summer. It includes students from here, and also includes students from other countries, developing countries, because again, ultimately getting those people the expertise to take care of the environment is critically important. So right here in Champaign-Urbana, a big piece of how humans are helping wildlife. So kind of a quick look at my background. I know I often have students in the audience that say, how do I get to be a veterinarian? How do I work with zoo animals? What was kind of your career path? I grew up in Chicago, in Wilmette, just a suburb on the north side, and was volunteering at our local dog and cat veterinarian from the moment I was in elementary school. I remember my mom bugging this poor guy till he couldn't say no anymore. And I literally would go in on the weekends and after school, and literally would start by cleaning the kennels, and eventually became part of the framework so that I would be helping with surgeries and doing a variety of things. But I knew from the beginning, as I had non-traditional pets, whether that be lizards or guinea pigs or whatever, that I was intrigued by animals, but dogs and cats weren't my kind of thing, and that I wanted to look at other things. And at that time, Jacques Cousteau was a big influence. I wanted to be a marine biologist for a little while. I read All Creatures Great and Small, and I really wanted to think if I could combine kind of a veterinary career with wildlife and potentially aquatic animals, that would be the way to go. These pictures here, I did a residency up at the Bronx Zoo in New York City, and that was a kind of a critical career path as far as learning all the things that you can do with zoo and wild animals outside of veterinary school. So in veterinary school, they do a phenomenal job, dogs and cats, horses and food animals, but they don't do a very good job in traditional veterinary school about learning how to take care of a pygmy marmoset or a prehensile tail porcupine. And so how do you learn how to do those things, it's by going on for additional training at zoos and things of that sort. So the other thing I wanted to share is zoos have come a long way from when I was growing up, in that a modern zoo looks a lot different than the kind of traditional older zoo. What that means is that it's better from an exhibit perspective, it's better from an animal welfare perspective, but it's much more complicated than it was. When I was growing up, and if I might go to a zoo in Chicago, very sterile, cement, but if this animal was having loose stool, if the animal was getting ready to give birth, if this animal had a variety of behavioral things, and you knew what it was eating, you always had that information. In the current zoological situation, they live in a naturalistic environment. There's a huge amount of areas that they can hide. If the animal's sick, you may not know it right away because he's got all these different places to go. And that, and many times, they live in multiple species all together. In our safari at the Animal Kingdom, we have impala and ostrich and rhino and gazelles all living on 100+ acres, and they can go wherever they want, and they can interact wherever they want. So the complexity of how we manage animals is much different in the modern zoological setting than it was in the traditional one. And when we think about our mission, it has also dramatically changed. What we do is not just display animals. It is all about helping animals, whether that be in our animal collections or helping animals overseas, helping the public understand about the importance of conservation in animals. And when we say education, traditionally we always used to think about education in zoos as a school group that would come through, but it's much, much bigger than that. It's about educating the public. It's about educating professionals. In our program, we have pre-veterinary students that do internships with us. We have veterinary students that do time with us. We have residents. We have postdocs. So there's a huge amount of work that has to happen for us to be successful in saving the planet. And there's so little that we know about a lot of these animals that research in our setting is really important, because you're not going to be able to learn about a lot of these little intricacies in a free-ranging or in a wild situation. So these are the three pillars of what our mission is when we talk about any zoo, any aquarium, any conservation organization around there. Now, at our place, we're a little bit unique. We often joke that we're not a zoo in the sense that we're a large theme park, and that we have the luxury of being very new, and when I say very new, compared to other zoos, often many zoos have been over 100 years old. We've been around for about 14, and what we did when we built our place was said, you know, we really want people to see exactly what we do behind the scenes and be very transparent about our animal care. So when you come visit the Animal Kingdom, I encourage you to come up to Conservation Station, also known as Rafiki's Planet Watch. And our veterinary hospital is completely open for guests to watch. And every day of the year, we have our medical procedures that happen in front of the guests. They can ask questions, they can videotape, but they watch all the things that we do. And most of our work is preventative medicine. Most of our work is keeping the animals healthy and doing routine checkups. That might be a sea turtle, or it might be a cheetah, or it might be a tiny little frog or a bird. And then obviously there are times that our animals get sick and ill, and we'll work on them too. But it's a great way for us to engage guests in a very Disney way, which is entertaining and educating at the same time. And we use these animals as a great hook to get people thinking about nature and thinking about animal care and thinking about where these animals come from in the wild. The other thing that people often don't think about in a modern zoo is how much we use conditioning or training to help us with the animal care. So when I say that, here are some examples with our giraffe, how these animals are conditioned to help with their regular care. And so we use positive reinforcement, we use the fancy word operant conditioning or training these animals so that they will help in how we take care of them. And giraffe are one of the most notorious animals that are difficult to anesthetize. Long necks, long legs, and when they fall asleep with an anesthetic or wake up, often can tend to hurt themselves. So we've, one example of many that we'll talk about, where if I need to do a physical exam on this giraffe, this zookeeper has target trained the giraffe that whenever it sees this kind of buoy, it just sticks its nose, and giraffe love to lick things, so that it not only sticks its nose, but it licks this buoy, and will keep its nose there as long as it needs to. So if I need to do an exam on this giraffe, I will climb on a ladder or look in the eyes, look in the ears. I can listen to the heart. I can do a blood sample just with that animal standing in its position like that. I can do a TB test. I can do vaccinations, all of those kind of things. And additionally, we use positive reinforcement or conditioning for our animals to go from one place to the other. So for anybody who's been out on our safari ride, 120 acres, the giraffe live out there all day long, but all the animals have their own night house, and they come in every night to their own building. And to do that, we've trained them to come in using different audio cues. So each animal has a different cue. Some are whistles, some are banging on the bottom of a pot, a dinner triangle, and each group of animals literally will line up and come in every night to their night house so that we can watch and make sure if they're pregnant, if there are any medical conditions, if they don't get along with others when they're eating, that we can manage that appropriately. And so here the giraffe are coming in off the safari over here, lining up and coming into their night house. And I'll tell you one of the funnier stories about the giraffes. When we first opened, all of a sudden one day the keepers called them in, and you see all the giraffes all gathered just outside that gate, and they're all staring down at the ground. And I love giraffes. They're very endearing, but they're not known for their intelligence here. And so the keeper kept calling, the giraffes kept being very stubborn, not coming in, and the keeper walked out there, and right in the middle of the path was an ostrich egg. The ostrich had laid an egg right there, and I think the giraffe were quite sure that it was a bomb or something very bad, and that they were going to have nothing to do with this ostrich egg. You know, they could have easily walked over it or around it, but they weren't coming anywhere near this. So the keeper quickly removed the ostrich egg, and quickly the giraffe kind of just wandered right in. Here we are with a giraffe road trip, and when I say that, we have the Animal Kingdom right next door, but a separate facility is our Animal Kingdom Lodge, which is a safari, African safari lodge that has a couple hundred African hoof stock there. And we often will move animals from one place to the other for breeding purposes, a variety of, and obviously when we move an animal, it's much easier if they cooperate and are part of that than if we have to anesthetize it or do it forcibly. So another great example of how the keepers will back this, what was a horse trailer that we cut the top off of to make it a giraffe trailer, into the back of our area for the giraffe, and they would just leave it there with the door open, and then after a couple days they'd put a little food in there, and the giraffe would go and inspect it, and after a couple more days they might put the food in there and then just close the door for a couple minutes, and then maybe they'd close the door for an hour, and then maybe they'd close the door and just drive around the parking lot once. And eventually this animal gets very conditioned that nothing bad's going to happen, and then we can just drive it over to the Animal Kingdom Lodge without any sedatives or stress associated with that. Now, we use operant conditioning on many, many different animals. You start by this target. We saw that with the giraffe. Here's a hippo that's target trained. And then you can build in a variety of different medical procedures or health procedures to make sure that you can kind of build on that. So this was a black rhino that had injured its horn. We needed to take some radiographs of that horn and see what was going on as far as at the base of the skull. This animal was completely awake, and through target training and conditioning would just stand there quietly while we took the radiographs. Many times food is a strong motivator. I'd say with the rhino, a lot of times they also love to have their back scratched, and that they will, with a very stiff brush, just be able to brush them down, and they love that. But our conditioning, our training is not unique to mammals. People always know, whether it be with dolphins or with elephants, that these are very intelligent animals that you can train. But we train a vast majority of our animals. Commonly, a body weight is an easy thing that tells us that they're healthy and allows us to make sure that without having to chase this bird around with a net, we can just ask our secretary of bird to jump on a scale. Same with our Komodo dragon. And even the poison dart frogs are clicker trained, and we have a big aquarium with a large number of poison dart frogs. They're all hiding in different little places under the leaves or whatever that might be. But you get the clicker out, and all of a sudden all these frogs come out from everywhere, and they jump into the little plastic container, which then gets put on a scale. And even if you weigh 4 or 8 grams or something like that, you can check their health without having to chase them around in the tank. So one of my last examples from conditioning or training has to do with our crocodiles. We've got about 30 male crocodiles. They were rescued from a leather farm in South Africa when we first opened. These animals came in at about 300 pounds. They're now weighing about 700 pounds, which is a big crocodile. They live in our river on the safari ride, along right next to the hippos. And when we first opened, it was very difficult. We hadn't set up from a training perspective or or worked with them as far as how are we going to work with an 800-pound, 700-pound crocodile from a health perspective and from a safety perspective. And what we've done is built a behind-the-scenes training area where these animals are trained to come back off the river into this area, and then they'll go into a holding box, if you will, that allows us to weigh them, get a blood sample, look at them. So the next footage I'm going to show you here is actually a crocodile coming into his crate. So there is the target. Again, we use that with all the different animals. He gets a little treat. So he will go in there. If we need to, we'll close the door behind him, collect a blood sample, put this many hundred pounds onto a scale. And if we don't, then we actually just have them come in routinely and then back them out, and the next animal comes in. And we do this all the time because we want this to be a routine behavior and not to have them come in just if something bad's happening or not. So he's going to slowly back up out of this. He got his treat, and we got our checkup there. So silverback gorillas are an interesting story in the sense that they've become a bit of a model from a human health perspective on heart disease. And what we've seen in zoos across the world is that as the male gorillas, and a silverback gorilla weighs about 300 to 450 pounds, get older, that they develop a lot of the same heart problems that humans have. And that could be cardiomyopathy, it could be aortic aneurysms, a variety of things. And as we have worked through training and conditioning, we've been able to use that to help us monitor this condition. So in the top right, you can actually see one of our gorillas being sedated, and we have a couple options. We can either give them an oral sedative, or we have an injection we can give in their arm. And again, because they're trained, we don't have to chase them around with a dart gun, so they can be anesthetized that way. This medical problem has become to the point that we've involved a variety of human cardiologists that have come in and said, these are the kind of medications you might want to consider. And the first thing the cardiologists, the human folks would say is, hey, we're trying to figure out, what's their normal heart rate or what's the normal blood pressure on a silverback gorilla, so we can figure out if our medications are working or what kind of the abnormalities they have. And, the truth being, who in the world's going to go in with a 450-pound gorilla and ask him to hold out his arm and get a awake blood pressure? The only times we ever had any data on these gorillas was when they were completely anesthetized. And obviously your blood pressures and all those things are much different if you're under general anesthesia than when you're commonly awake. So nobody had collected any data on normal cardiac values on awake gorillas, but in order to really figure out this disease process, we needed to do that. So we can collect all the regular cardiac stuff, ultrasounds, EKGs, X-rays like you can see here. So here's one of our silverbacks. What you're looking at is an endotracheal tube, which is hooked up to an anesthetic machine and goes into the animal's windpipe or trachea here. We're holding his head up because we're doing chest X-rays. So many of you have gone into the doctors and they do chest X-rays. You just stand in front of the cassette on the wall. Our gorillas, although they're trained to do a lot of stuff, won't come over to the hospital and stand in front of the wall there. So this animal's asleep for that. And here's another X-ray. But as we want to develop this kind of normal database, we have now trained the gorillas to be awake for their ultrasounds and their EKGs and their blood pressures. So what you see here is our gorilla night house, back of house in one of our silverbacks. These are the keepers that work with the animal every day. They have a great relationship with these animals, and they have trained or conditioned, I believe this is Gino, to be part of this examination. So they have him hold his hands up high so that he doesn't grab our $100,000 ultrasound probe. And then they will hold the ultrasound probe over the heart, and then a human cardiac ultrasound technician is looking at the heart rate, looking at the size of the heart, They can measure all the different parameters to determine if the medications are working and what he's doing, but we do that voluntarily with him completely awake. You'll see one of our keepers every once in a while pops a little grape into Gino's mouth, and he says, "Thanks, and I'll keep here for as long as you've got grapes." The other thing I find interesting, he has no interest in the ultrasound probe at all, but he loves the gel. And so when we're done, I think it's a bit of like a pudding treat or something. He will literally just wipe the gel off and lick his fingers. So what I don't have here, but we also have built, it's kind of a big PVC pipe, and he'll put his arm out into the PVC pipe, and then we have a blood pressure cuff that will measure his blood pressure, just like, you know, at least when I go into the CVS and have to see how high my blood pressure is. Completely awake, we'll do that with him also. So this is a moment where we're going to stop talking about Disney's Animal Kingdom and go to Africa. But before I do, I want to see if there's any questions on the things that we've talked about so far. Feel free, we've got several of our students with the microphones who will come find you just over here.
I'm pretty loud, so. My question is, the diseases you're saying that as the silverbacks and stuff, they get older, so is that more a captivity thing, or is that something that you guys actually found in nature also, that they end up with the same diseases and stuff, or is it a sedentary lifestyle like humans that leads to the diseases?
I'd have to say we don't know, and that's probably because we know so little about in the wild what might happen. And as you know, in a situation like ours or in zoos, we see a lot more geriatric issues and older age issues because the animals live much longer in our situation. And if you are an animal with a heart disease in the wild, you probably at some point aren't going to be able to escape predators, find food, reproduce, all of those things. And you know, there's not unlike our place where we have a trained veterinary pathologist, there's nobody over there that's going to be able to kind of find those things. Now, that being said, there are more and more work that's happening with health issues with gorillas and other wild animals as far as learning some of those things that might be infectious diseases, that might be aging-related stuff, but we don't know from a gorilla perspective. There is a, I believe, just approved grant, if you will, an IMLS grant that is looking at this disease in gorillas across the country and also trying to answer that question as far as free-ranging or wild gorillas. Good question. Just over here.
Hello. A couple of years ago, myself and several other students at the University of Florida's College of Veterinary Medicine went on a tour, behind-the-scenes tour at Animal Kingdom. And we noticed that there were not a lot of barriers out on the safari. So are these animals conditioned not to cross these barriers? Because you saw different types of exotics in different places, and there was no crossing over.
Great question. So when it comes to predators, there are hidden barriers that you cannot see. And the Disney Imagineers have done a great job of, when you're out on the safari and you see on your left side cheetahs and on your right side gazelles, it may look like the cheetahs can have a race, but they can't get to the gazelles. And they've done that mostly with hidden moats. So, for example, around the lions, they're on a kind of elevated area, and as the elevated area comes down, there's a moat that you can't see from your safari truck. But that allows us. Now, there are, you know, rhinos that live in with the ostrich, that live in with the other non-carnivorous animals that all sometimes chase each other and get in trouble. We've actually had to move a lot of the zebras off because zebras can be kind of destructive and hurtful to babies as we're having baby gazelles and things like that. So we've moved the zebras to another area when we're having calves. But when you are on the safari rider, a lot of the areas, the Imagineers want you to believe you are in Africa, you're not in Central Florida, you see no place that we put out food for them, no place that we put out water for them, no place that there are any barriers, and it's all hidden tricks of the trade, if you will. Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and continue, and we'll go from Central Florida to Africa for real, not just with the hidden barriers, and we'll start talking about some of our conservation work. As I mentioned, this is just one example that is close to my heart and work that I've been doing for several years, but please understand that zoos and aquariums across the country and veterinarians are doing this kind of conservation work with a huge variety of different species in different areas of the world: Pacific, South America, Africa, Asia. But this is a project that I've been working on that I wanted to share with you. So in the fancy terms, we'll call it laparoscopic vasectomy as population control, blah, blah, blah. But in simple terms, it's Planned Parenthood for elephants. And that helps kind of bring it to where it is. And the first question 99% of the people in the audience are asking is, why in the world would you want to do this with animals that I always hear about? There's not enough, right? There is poaching, people want their ivory, there's not enough elephants, so why would you want to look at population control for them? And the truth is, in southern Africa, there are so many elephants because there isn't an issue with poaching, and because they are very reproductively sound, that you will have huge issues with what those populations of elephants are doing to the environment. And so the first time I became exposed to this problem, I was over at a wildlife meeting in South Africa, and I had the opportunity to go to several reserves throughout South Africa, including Kruger and some of the other reserves. And I went to their kind of senior biologists, senior wildlife officials, and I said, you know, there are folks in the States that really want to get involved in helping, and we have a lot of resources and expertise, and what can we do to help? And what is your biggest conservation problem that's facing you throughout the country? And he said, and everybody that I talked to said the same thing. What are we going to do with our elephants? We have so many elephants that they're destroying the ecosystem, and all the animals that live in that ecosystem are negatively affected, or we have to go kill our elephants, and we don't necessarily want to do that. So what do we do? So when you think about ecosystem health and all the animals that live in the trees, and how having too many elephants, literally, this is our work in Swaziland, was in 2009, and we would drive for hours through Swaziland at this big game park, and there wasn't a tree left. All the trees were dead, and that's because they had been either pushed over or the bark had been eaten off by elephants. And so the animals that live in those trees become hugely impacted, as in they no longer exist at the game reserve because they have no place to live. So it becomes this balance and a difficult choice between elephants and the rest of the ecosystem, with no clear choice about how to handle that. So our goals, as we started to think about this project and go from a concept to a reality, we wanted to be able to provide these wildlife officials with a tool that can be used to manage their populations. We wanted something that would help them reduce the need to have to kill or cull these elephants, and be able to help ultimately the biodiversity and conservation efforts for South Africa. Now, I want to just be clear, this is a project that I've been involved with for many years, but there's a huge variety of partners, both in the United States and then also in South Africa, that have been helpful. These are sometimes at universities, these are in private industry, these are nonprofit organizations that have all come together to help with this difficult issue. So looking at South Africa itself and Swaziland, these are several of the reserves we worked at over the last 5 years or so. Our most recent work has been in Swaziland, and then I leave next month. I'll be over in a place called Soleti, which is just up outside of Kruger's northern gate here. So when you think about elephants, what's really neat and interesting about them is, from a social behavioral herd perspective, there's often one dominant bull. And this dominant bull, largest, oldest, strongest, chases away all the other subdominant bulls. And whenever the females in their matriarchal herds come into estrus or come into heat, he will be in charge of breeding. And so while he doesn't usually live with these large herds of related females and their offspring, he will come into those herds as the animals are going into heat. And so if you were to look at sterilizing just the dominant bulls in a population, you'd have a huge impact on the hundreds or more of the elephants that live in the whole reserve. Now, from what we know from a human perspective, vasectomy has been used for many, many years, very safe and effective. We know it's permanent, and we also know that, unlike castration, it's much different in the sense hormone levels stay the same, your behavior stay the same. All of the things that you think about changing if you were going to do a castration don't change with a vasectomy. So when you think about wild populations and wanting to maintain all their normal social behavior interactions, vasectomy is really the way to go so that nothing changes after the fact. So how do you do this when you're working on a huge reserve in the middle of Africa? I'm no longer in my comfort zone where I've got a big hospital and lots of equipment and all the things you think about from a well-staffed, well-equipped veterinary hospital. You've got to go find your patient. You've got to be able to anesthetize it. You've got to be able to do this in the middle of the field with, no power and no roof, and then be able to wake it up and know that if anything happens afterwards, you're not going to be able to provide, post-operative antibiotics and those kind of things. So this was a huge chore, and it started very small, where we had to answer some basic questions about anesthesia, surgery, recovery, making sure the animals are doing well. And now it has become not a research project, but a service that can be provided to Africa. So this is looking at elephant dart, if you will. These are fired from a dart gun from the helicopter. The doors are taken off the chopper. The animals are identified kind of by the head ranger as this is the bull that we want to have sterilized or have the procedure, and then the animal is darted from the chopper. It takes about 10 minutes for the anesthetic to take effect. What the chopper does, in addition to finding the elephant, I'll show you a video clip in a moment, this chopper's noise that it makes is actually going to move the elephant to a place out of the trees. So just at about 5 to 10 minutes, as this elephant is starting to get a little sleepy, the chopper will actually move that elephant out of the trees into this old landing strip, this flat area. So as we bring in the ground crew, that we have a easy access to our patient and don't have to worry about getting into a big, heavy wooded area. So you might be able to see the dart right there in the left rump. Our patient's just starting to slow down, and within a minute is probably going to lay down and fall asleep. So this is our patient asleep. You can see a pretty dramatic sight. These animals can be quite large. Myself and Dean Hendrickson. Dean is an equine surgeon at Colorado State University, the veterinary school there, and he's developed a lot of laparoscopic techniques with horses. And for a while, horses were about the biggest thing anybody would use a laparoscope with. Now we've used those techniques for the elephants. So let me show you what's going on here. Crane truck is used to bring our patient to us. It also lifts this animal up so that we can place these straps around the legs and around the tusks. What we need to do is, from a safety, from an anesthetic perspective and also from a surgical perspective, is have a completely asleep elephant actually standing up next to us in this crane truck. So these ropes are now going to be all gathered, and we're going to lift the elephant up using this crane truck into a standing position. So let me show you this little this video clip. This is my Disney heritage piece, because you're going to see an elephant fly here. So as I said, our elephant is under general anesthesia, has been darted. It actually has an endotracheal tube placed in its mouth. And then these straps are all around the legs and the tusk and being used to lift the elephant into a position where it stands just next to the crane truck. So we're starting to load equipment on the back of this crane truck. It actually is going to become our African Savannah MASH OR unit. We'll put our tables and everything goes up on that, and this elephant will be lowered down so his feet are touching the ground. So here's the anatomy lesson for the day. And if you're not a veterinary student, I won't quiz you about it later, but just so you know, elephants are unique. Only a couple other mammal species are this way in that their testes are located inside their abdomen. So if you think about where ovaries are in females, elephants have their testes the same place, just next to their kidney, intra-abdominal. Unlike dogs and cats and horses and people, there's nothing between the legs. So when we talk about doing elephant vasectomy, that means we need to go inside to be able to remove the vas deferens or remove a couple inches of that duct. So this is kind of looking where we would make our incisions from a surgical perspective. The hip bone is right here. We actually feel through the thick skin where the hip bone is, and just in front of that we'll make our incision. This is Jeff Zuba. Jeff is a zoo and wildlife vet that works out at the San Diego Wild Animal Park. Has been very helpful from an anesthetic monitoring with these animals. So this is hooked up to the animal's endotracheal tube and to an oxygen tank, and he will actually help the animal with breathing if it needs it throughout the procedure. He has a little button here on this ventilator that basically just fills the animal's lungs with oxygen. They actually do extremely well. We haven't had any concerns there, but having Jeff and his equipment there is very helpful. Here they're placing that endotracheal tube, and here's just a regular blood pressure cuff that you can pick up at your local Walgreens, but we hook it up to the end of the animal's trunk, and here you can see the opening of his trunk, and we can measure the animal's blood pressure right there. They don't make cuffs big enough for their arms, so we have. Looking at our patient, kind of all the things that are happening at once. On the front end, again, animal's intubated, and here's the tubing that connects to the oxygen. We've got IV fluids and an infusion pump here. If we need to give additional anesthetic, we've got a catheter in the ear. And then on the back end, this side is being prepped for surgery. You see we often have many spectators that are helping us in the African savanna. And then this side where we have the surgical table, all the blue drapes and equipment there are sterile. And so even though we're in the middle of the African savanna, we try to have a very sterile operating room, if you will. This is looking at our elephant scope. So we work with the Karl Storz company who builds laparoscopes for humans and for veterinarians to a much smaller scale. And we went to them, and their offices are in Germany, and said, we have this crazy idea. We want to help elephants. We want you to build us an elephant laparoscope. And they, after they got off the floor and stopped laughing, they said, well, how big and how long and all those kind of things we had to develop. But this is about 3 feet long, so 1.2 meters. This is all battery operated, so what you see on this monitor screen here is my hand at the end of the laparoscope. So anything that's at the end, and this will be inside of our patient, shows up on the TV screen here. This has got a recording device, and it has a light source, and all this is just easily grabbed and go in the battery operated world. And then inside of this laparoscope is an operating channel, so you put your instruments in the hole here, it comes out that end. And here you see at the end, this is a biopsy forceps, but what we'll see in a couple minutes is how we use just a tiny pair of scissors that go through that to do our procedure. So again, here's our patient anesthetized, the back of our crane truck, our sterile operating field, and we're just getting ready to place the laparoscope inside of our patient. This is looking at, several years ago we would place the monitor on the back of the elephants, and we'd be looking at the monitor for what's going on at the end of the laparoscope. There's a fair amount of glare in the African sun, as you can imagine, so we've actually converted over. You can go to Best Buy and get your own virtual reality glasses that you can watch movies on your iPod with, and we just hook these up to our laparoscope, so we look like we're, spacemen over in Africa with our funny little goggles here. But this, what he's seeing here on those glasses, inside of these virtual reality glasses, is exactly what's happening on the inside with this laparoscope. This is Johan, and Johan is a South African equine veterinary surgeon at the veterinary school, and he is learning how to do this procedure so that he can do this on his own in the years ahead. So here's your only surgical shot for those that are squeamish. It doesn't get any worse than this. This is looking inside of our patient. This is the elephant's testes looking into the laparoscope. There's a white cord that comes off the back of the testes that we're grabbing with this device, and then we're going to remove about 2 to 3 inches of this duct, which basically connects the testes to the outside world, and just going to remove that so it can no longer pass. And I'll click on this video. You'll see kind of how the scissors snip through that, and this is looking through the laparoscope in a recording. So we'll cut through this side, then we'll just cut to the other side, and then this grasping device basically just pulls that from the inside of the elephant to the outside of the elephant, and we're done. So kind of in summary from a project perspective, this, when we first did it and never done it before, it took about 4 to 5 hours to do an elephant in the African savanna. As with anything, as you get better and more proficient, your equipment gets better and your training gets better. We're now at about 45 minutes for the surgery time. Total downtime is about 1.5 hours from DART to reversal. And then what we're doing now that we've been so quick and efficient is that we're doing multiple animals in a day. In Swaziland, we did 2 to 3 animals per day. which makes it very efficient to go in for a week or two and get a large number of animals done. Ongoing research that we're involved with, we're continuing to monitor all the places that we've worked from a long-term social behavioral. We know that we haven't seen in the many years we've been doing this that there have been any negative effects to the animals, but we also want to ensure that we're doing the right thing. And we know that elephants are very long-lived, and so we want to make sure that we're asking and answering all the right questions. Some of the other questions, we know that when this procedure happens with humans, it takes a good 30 to 45 days before you're considered sterile. We don't know in elephants, but we're finding out. And then this year, what we're adding on to our project is semen collection and cryopreservation, so that as we are working on these elephants, we're actually collecting samples. Those samples are frozen into a bank that can be used then in the United States or anywhere in the world to help with artificial insemination. And in the United States, in zoo populations, there's a fair number of elephants that are being conceived and that are giving birth from artificial insemination, but there's only 3 bulls in the U.S. that are able to donate semen. So it'd be great if, from a genetic perspective, we had semen from wild populations that could help with that. The other thing that we've done just over the last year is, since this has been such an ongoing project that continues to gain momentum and has so many players, is create a nonprofit organization called the Elephant Population Management Program. It's nonprofit so that we can apply for grants, we can get donations, has its own website, LEPMP, or Elephant Population Management Program. And for those that are interested in more about this work, there's a lot of great information at that website. And then lastly, what we'll be doing in April of this year is really focusing on training the folks in country to be able to do this on their own. So, you know, it makes no sense for us to go over and over and over in the years ahead. They have the expertise, they'll have the equipment, they'll have the ability to do this on their own. So as future parks and reserves need this, it becomes much more efficient and less costly. So there's one of our many group pictures before we wake up our patient. What's really impressive is these animals literally will wake up in 4 minutes or so and stand up and walk away. When we first started doing these, we had all the animals with radio collars, and the rangers would follow the animals for days, weeks, months, years to make sure that the stitches healed well, there's no problems with infection, and what we've seen year after year is that there's no problems at all with these animals. So the early pictures, you'll see this radio collar. When we started working in Swaziland, we actually stopped needing to put radio collars on all the animals, but that's how we monitored the animals in the early years. So why don't I take a moment to answer any questions on this part of the project, and then we have a final piece I'll share with you. Dr. Mitchell.
Dr. Stetter, I have a question. Actually, it just relates to, you made the point that it's easy when you go for the big bull, and obviously if you're the biggest, strongest bull and you've been around for a while, there's probably a genetic value to that. Are there any specific diseases in that area you might be concerned about, that you might lose some genetic biodiversity that might affect those animals long term?
I think that's a great question, and obviously we know that from a Darwinian perspective, if you are the dominant bull, then there is some value in making sure that that gene pool continues on. The alternative now that they're facing with is really culling or killing those animals, so either way the genetic material is lost. We're hoping that with some of the cryopreservation that genetic material maintains, but from a resistance to disease and other things like that, it's a great question, and I don't think we know the answer. In the States, probably the 2 diseases that we worry about the most from elephants is a herpes virus that can then affect them, and tuberculosis, which is a big issue. In free-ranging elephants in Africa, neither of those are problems that have been found anyway. I'll let him give you the microphone, but I'll formulate that as you. I think from a recording.
Who's funding these operations?
So the early days, through the research and development part of this, it was all funded through Disney conservation grants, and we were able to get kind of seed money to get us over there and to be able to build the equipment and all of that kind of thing. Nowadays, it's funded through the Elephant Population Management nonprofit, and some of those are through donations, and then additionally all the institutions that are kind of part of that help pay for things. So, for example, my time is paid through Disney. the surgeon from CSU, his time is paid through Colorado State University, San Diego Wild Animal Park. We're on salary when we're doing that work, but the nonprofit organization helps with our travel and things of that. And then the reserve that is getting the service, if you will, they're in charge of all the big expenses, the helicopter, the crane truck, all of those kind of things. So it's kind of a joint venture.
Hi, I'm just wondering, I think that vasectomies in humans are reversible, if I'm not mistaken. Have you considered doing a process that would be reversible so that if you did encounter problems with the populations, you would be able to address that?
Great question, and to be honest, boy, I don't know if, I certainly don't have the expertise to get back in there and put that back together. That being said, you're right, in humans where things are smaller and easier to access, they have not 100%, but some ability to put things back together. Good question. Just behind here to the left.
While you guys have the animals anesthetized, do you do any other sort of health monitoring or collections for the research?
We do a variety of testing, both to make sure the animal's healthy, and some of those consider complete blood counts and things like that. The other thing that we've been doing is working with any researchers in the States. For example, there's been a question about what is normal vitamin E levels in free-ranging elephants so that we can make sure that we're feeding them the right amount of vitamin E in zoos around the world. So all the animals are bled for those vitamin analysis and sent to the University of Pretoria for in-country blood evaluation so we can share that information. So yes, a variety of different things.
With the semen cryopreservation that you're talking about, is there any thoughts about bringing, if you want to bring that into the captive populations, is there any concern about introducing any viruses that maybe these elephants in the wild have overcome that captive populations can't overcome?
Great question, and one that the USDA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ask all the time. And so we will be going through, and there's actually not our group, but the International Elephant Foundation is working through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right now for permits that would allow semen to come in. The good news is, from a disease perspective with elephants, there really is not the concern that there are with some of the other antelope species that carry, for example, foot and mouth disease. There's a real difficulty getting any samples in from Africa that for those species that carry foot and mouth disease because of concerns of bringing it into the States. But luckily, elephants aren't part of that group. Just back there on the left.
Are either the reserves or the elephant organization working towards any restoration efforts for the ecosystems as well after all of this wraps up?
I think that really depends on which places they're talking about. Right now, I think they're in that, stage where we just got to figure out how to deal with the elephant population, and then whether that be naturally or through enhanced methods to get the trees to be growing back up again. Yes, sir.
Why is there a population problem?
Well, the couple things. Number one, they do a phenomenal job of preventing poaching in South Africa with elephants. So if you're in some of the other more Eastern African countries, there still is a fair amount of poaching for ivory. South Africa has a very rigorous ranger group, and others that there really isn't a poaching problem with elephants like there are in other places. Additionally, if you think about 300 years ago, when elephants could wander throughout and there weren't countries that were separating and there weren't reserves that are fenced in, there probably were more elephants, but not of a population issue because they could literally go wherever they wanted. And nowadays, even a place like Kruger National Park, which is as big as the state of Connecticut, is still fenced in, and is still means that at some point when you have a 12% population growth per year, that you're going to have an impact on the environment. So the studies that have been done at Kruger say that carrying capacity of that park is probably about 8,000 to 10,000 elephants to fit in that park. They're at probably about 15,000 elephants now. So the government has approved, and they haven't done it yet, but talking about having to go in and remove thousands of elephants. Yes, ma'am. And then we're going to go to another part of Africa for a moment.
Just wondering if there's interest in this program in other African countries. I know Botswana has had some very controversial culling programs in the past, and Has there been interest shown or mechanisms to kind of spread the word?
Great question. The philosophy in the different countries are much different in how they manage wildlife, and Botswana has probably many more elephants. Well, not probably, definitely has more elephants than South Africa, but they don't have them really in the fenced-in areas. So Chobe National Park in Botswana probably has 100 to 150,000 elephants. But the way they manage wildlife is much different. They don't have a hands-on approach that South Africa does. So they probably wouldn't look at an option like this as far as how they manage their wildlife. That being said, we are providing a tool and something that anybody can use, and that doesn't matter. So we're going to talk a little bit about Africa, but not about elephants. And I want to tell you kind of a story about our first work in Africa was at a reserve called Pinda. And Pinda is a very successful ecotourism private game reserve. And what I was most impressed about at Pinda was that there was absolutely no poaching. Many other places, and when I say poaching, I'm not talking about with the elephants, but with all the different animals there. And when I talked to the folks there, they said that was because they had such a great relationship with the local community. They build local health centers, they build schools, and that they employ all of the folks that work in the local community at Pinda. And we asked to kind of go out and see some of this. And so we went to a place called the Nkomo School, and we met Mrs. Zakali. Mrs. Zakali started Nkomo School with 60 kids underneath the tree. She was asked by the local community to take the kids and teach them something. As her enthusiasm and her passion was evident, she took that 60 kids in a tree and built a whole school complex that now has 800 kids and has multiple classrooms. It still is what you'd consider terribly overcrowded from the United States perspective. Each class has about 100 kids, and each class has one teacher, but compared to where they were 12 years ago when she started this. So she was certainly somebody who literally changed my life, and the way she has been able to grow and educate the students was an inspiration that we built on. And so when I say that, you'll see in a moment, my wife has been involved with the Elephant Project for many years. She's a veterinary nurse, and to her credit, she's the humanitarian of the group. I'm the one who likes the critters. She was able to build a sister school program with Nkomo and in Orlando, Florida, that allowed fundraising, and eventually there was so much enthusiasm with what was going on in Africa, it allowed teachers from Florida to go over to Nkomo to help the teachers, help the students, help the facilities, and then also, as you'll see in a moment, we also were allowed, we've been able to build a conservation education program. So when you think about the kids that live in Africa, that live right next to all these really cool animals, I would argue that our kids in the States probably have seen lions and elephants more than the kids who live a mile from them over there. And they have nothing in their curriculum that teaches them about nature. They have nothing in their science, they have nothing in that teaches them to appreciate and respect, value nature. So our project was really to help the kids, but if we can help the kids and help them understand what's going on right next door, then hopefully we'll be able to help the bigger picture too. This is Lucas, one of my kids, who also has been helpful with the programs. If you see any of these Caucasian kids in the video I'm about to show you, they're ones that I brought with, not ones that are there in Africa. So I'm going to share with you a video. This video is just a couple minutes long, but it tells a better story than what I'm able to on my still pictures. Hi, I'm Mark Stetter. I'm an executive with the Disney Company, and I'm here in South Africa to introduce you to a great program that we've been doing here at a local community school. You may be aware that Disney helps communities all over the world, but most of the times people think of that associated with our different resorts and theme parks. But we're involved in a lot of ways in a lot of places, and this is a great project that we wanted to share with you. So here we are just in Zulu-Natal province of South Africa. And in South Africa, there's a lot of schools that have needy kids, kids that may not have the opportunity that they do in the United States, and also kids that are affected by HIV and other economic problems. So the Disney Company has been committed to help people not only in the United States, but globally. And here in South Africa, we have a group of cast members and a group of local community folks from the United States that have come here. We have 16 folks. They're dedicating their time to help the facilities here at this local Nkomo school in South Africa. What we're doing is painting the school, giving it a brand new facelift, but at the same time, and probably more importantly, we're helping some of the at-risk kids, kids that might not have parents, kids that might not have the resources to even have a single meal per day. So the Disney Worldwide Conservation Fund has helped give money to these kids and help provide and assure that each day they get at least one meal to help them carry on.
Back in the United States, I became the PTA president at my kids' elementary school, and I was lucky enough to be able to introduce Nkomo as a sister school to Palm Lake Elementary. And we spent the year fundraising different things, money to build them another water tank and guttering system so their kids would have fresh water at school. And also we collected playground equipment so their kids would have toys and balls and jump ropes and things to play with during their recess time.
I think one of my most memorable experiences was today. We spent an hour with 24 teachers from Nkomo School, and we spent time getting to know each other and sharing information about each other. And then I think my favorite part of that was at the end when what song was it? I don't remember. They broke into song.
So Disney's Animal Programs and the Disney Worldwide Conservation Fund is helping communities and helping the people that live amongst wildlife so that we can assure that these natural resources, these parks and reserves are here into the future. And it's not just about helping the animals, you also have to help the people understand the value and the resources that those animals can provide.
I love working with children, and I went into the kindergarten rooms and did some activities with them. And the teachers are very excited about the puppets and the ideas that they can use with their class.
Teaching the teachers with the biofacts and just seeing the excitement on the kids' face, having never seen a rhino skull or a rhino horn or a lion skull, and really bringing what I do back home, bringing that here to the kids and to the teachers.
I don't have words to express my happiness. Our school has really changed. It's a new school. It seems as if it is newly built.
We've got 800 shining faces here, their first day back in school, and we say hello from South Africa and from the Nkomo Primary School. So that was a nice lead, and I'll share a couple more just kind of funny, compelling stories. But this is the group from the U.S., with the exception of the photographer, who's me, so I was there, but I always am taking the pictures. But including both Mrs. Akali, the school superintendent, a variety of the faculty, and then the folks that came from the U.S. And they built, while we were there, a concrete wall, and then we were able to kind of give them paint a new opening, a new front of the school, and then they were able to fill in their vision for the students and for kind of the school in the future. But it was an incredible bonding experience for teachers from the States and folks from Africa to kind of share experiences and to kind of see what happens in faraway places. So most of the teachers that went with us had never been out of the United States and certainly had never been to Africa, seeing how folks live in the communities with the Zulu huts, carrying all their groceries and their kids on their head or on the way to school here. So it was very eye-opening, not only from living at a reserve. We lived in tents at the Phinda Reserve, and then would drive through the reserve on the way to Nkomo. Then at Nkomo, the place got a complete new facelift, so painted everything indoors and outside, and then in a variety of different ways we included kind of fun things about animals. So we included the Big Five, and then included both the English and the Zulu name for each of the animals there. So this is their kitchen, kind of an outdoor dining, if you will, al fresco, and they have every day, this is called pap, and pap is kind of grits or potato based, and then over that they'll get gravy that's gravy and often some meat that's cooked in these poiki pots. And one of the things that we were able to do through a grant through Disney was ensure that all the kids got a hot meal once a day, and that in many cases is terrible, heart-wrenching as it is, greater than 50% of the kids out of these 800 kids don't have parents. They've lost their parents from HIV, and they are living with extended family, or sometimes if you're a teenager, you become the parent for the younger kids. So this is kind of the hot meal, if you will, and everybody gets one. They have a plate, but they don't have utensils, so everybody will use their hands for lunch. One of my fondest memories was one of the youngsters became very good friends with one of the teachers, and as you saw from a lot of the footage, a lot of the folks from the United States have long, straight, blonde hair, and they'd never seen that before. And so they were really intrigued with what the hair might feel like, and so they had the courage to kind of go up to one of the teachers and said, "Hey, can I touch your hair?" And she, of course, said yes, and before I knew it, all the kids after lunch, to the point of hundreds, were lined up to touch all of the blonde, straight hair women's hair. And the funniest part was they'd all just finished their lunch with their hands, and I kind of called it the gravy conditioner day, because all of them had a special feel to their hair after that experience. The other favorite story of mine is these women all are the kitchen workers. And when we arrived, the videographer interviewed everybody on the U.S. team and everybody who works at Nicomo, and first thing he said was, what do you expect that you'll get out of this project, or a variety of just general questions. But as the kitchen ladies were talking to him after we'd been there for a day or two, they spoke to him in Zulu, and he was able to relay to us that they were amazed, they were blown away that women could paint. And so in Africa, certainly where they are, it's a man's job. Women don't paint. And they saw all these people from the States, women were painting, and they asked us, could we paint? And we were like, oh yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. You can paint as much as you want. So they were painting machines. They had rollers, brushes, and they would be waiting for us when we arrived in the morning, and the last ones to leave, and they would be painting like crazy. Now, they became very good friends with several of the school teachers. This is Janine, and Janine had a iPod, and on that iPod, she had Beyonce, and they had never seen anything like an iPod, let alone, a video of Beyonce singing All the Single Ladies. And they memorized that video, and as you may know, in Africa, a lot of times when the people are working, they are singing while they're working, and they, along with Janine's creativity, made up a whole routine that was all the painting ladies instead of all the single ladies, and they did the dance that Beyonce does with their rollers, and to the we are the painting ladies, we are the painting ladies. Ooh, 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 ooh. And so they'd come around the building all singing this, and it was just priceless. So the other part that from helping wildlife was really important to us, and it was just the start when we went there this first time, and it's actually grown, so we have now an additional 3-year grant to ensure that there is nature and conservation as part of the school curriculum for elementary school kids. So each grade has a different level of what they're going to learn about nature. Some of them are by different species, and some of it are about the environment, but a group of 3 folks from the animal programs that are educators, including our curator of education, will be going over to meet with the teachers and develop a curriculum all around conservation education. So I think this is my last slide. Our painting ladies saying goodbye, our international detente there with some of the kids from the school, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And also feel free if you are, again, shy or want to chat afterwards, I'll be glad to talk to anybody afterwards down here. Thanks very much for all those that came today.
In 1993, I had spent some time in Zimbabwe. What's happened to the wildlife in Zimbabwe?
The question was, what's happening with wildlife in Zimbabwe? And Zimbabwe was known for many, many years as a leader in wildlife management and having some of the most important collections. And I haven't been to Zimbabwe in probably about 8 years, and I really can't speak to it. But certainly the political situation in Zimbabwe and the economic situation has really changed things. And so from colleagues I know that they no longer are able to kind of go in and help the wildlife officials, and I think there's a much more of an issue with poaching because of the economic downturn and people being hungry than there ever was before.
The other thing I want to do, the testicles in an elephant ever descend?
Never descend. They're always up in the abdomen.
How does that, you would wonder about the
I have wondered.
Spermatogenesis, then, wouldn't you?
And as many of you know, in many species, if the testes are not descended, they stay much warmer in cryptorchids, or they even talk about in people that have go biking a lot, or that the temperature changes enough that they can become less fertile. But obviously, elephants have worked out a way that they can stay warm and still make lots of babies. It really depends on the size of that population. So, for example, it depends on the size of the population and how much they want to reduce the growth rate. So in Swaziland, for example, they said, we don't want any more babies in the foreseeable future. Please do all of our breeding males. Other places have said, hey, instead of a 12% growth rate, we'd like to have maybe a 2% growth rate. So can you look at doing, 90% of our breeding males, but not all of them, because we'd still like to have some babies over the next couple of years. So there's a variety of population modeling, which is way out of my league, but that you can run through if your lifespan is this long and you want a population rate of this percent and you believe this many animals are lost from predation or disease, then you want to have this many animals giving birth, and you can run your model that way. I think our tool is effective in populations that have hundreds of animals. It's probably not realistic when you're talking about thousands and thousands of animals. And so when you're talking about a place like Chobe National Park that has 100,000 elephants, there's no way that you could implement something like this. But if you're talking about a reserve that has hundreds of elephants, now you're looking at, half of those elephants are female. And then you look at, of the ones that are male, how many are old enough to be breeding, and then you look at the ones that are doing the breeding because they're the dominant males. And suddenly, at a reserve that has hundreds and hundreds of elephants, you just need to vasectomize 15, and you can have a huge impact on the population. And that's kind of how the place we're working at this April has 17 bulls they'd like us to work on. They have a population, I think, of a couple hundred elephants.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if you had a sense of whether there's any resistance to changing the perspective about conservation of the animals, given the economic difficulties of the countries. And I could just imagine that Westerners coming in and saying, well, you need to take care of your animal populations because they're a valuable resource, and not poach them and things like that. I can imagine that it could be a hard sell.
I think that in a place like South Africa, who are committed to wildlife conservation from a government and from an economy and such, that there has been no pushback, and they've welcomed everybody up to the Department of Education. One picture I don't think I was able to show today, but while we were there, the director of education for the entire government heard that we were there in South Africa and heard all this buzz about what are these crazy Americans doing. They're donating all the time. They're repainting this. What's going on? And he flew out from Pretoria to to where we were at Nicomo and came to visit to see firsthand what was going on, and they were just blown away. They've had people that have given money, you know, they may have had well-off folks that came and see the really cool work that's going on, and that's how she's built a lot of school classrooms through the years, but they've never had anybody that donated their time and stayed there and did all the things that we were doing. So we've had no resistance to that. Now, there certainly are, you know, the gentleman before asked about Zimbabwe, and if you're in a country that economically, politically is in a completely different place, and you had, you know, a bunch of crazy Americans come in and say, hey, I think you should include nature in your curriculum, you're absolutely right. It could be much different, but we've been very much welcomed.
Has there been interest from Adam or Natasha in any of these programs?
There has been interest. We haven't been able to, we're very close professional colleagues with the folks at the South African National Parks Board, Sand Parks, and we've been in discussion with them for many years. As you can imagine, elephants and the question about elephant culling is very politically, emotionally charged, and so they and we have really not, you know, publicly said what would be best. We've tried to say, you know, we've got a tool, you can use it where you need to. I think personally Addo would be a benefit from this, and they're the right size park and they have enough problems with elephant population that makes sense. At the same time, politically, Sand Parks has said, we believe culling is what we're going to have to do. There are no other options, and that's what they've said publicly. And I think they've been waiting till after the World Cup to potentially see what their next step is.
What kind of opportunities are available for involvement in some of the conservation education programs through Disney?
Great question. So for any of the students, undergrad or veterinary in the audience, I would encourage you, there is, if you just Google Walt Disney World professional internships within animal programs, we have 68, I think, different internships. These are 6-month paid positions that you can get college credit for, and they're everything from animal behavior to chemistry to nutrition to medical records. And so a huge variety of different things that give people great experience and allow you to come work with us down there. Now, past the undergraduate point, there is preceptorships, which are for veterinary students, which allow you to come work with us. And then we also have residencies and postdoc with the University of Florida in Gainesville positions. And I'd be glad to talk to you afterwards if you have more specific way how to apply and things like that. I know this woman here has been very patient.
I was just wondering what the approximate cost at this stage in the elephant scheme that you're doing per an elephant. And I know you said that reserves are primarily in charge of picking up the bulk of that cost. And you know, is that a feasible thing for them to do, or does that limit the accessibility of the procedure?
Great question. So right now, because it is no longer a research program, it's a service that's being provided. We've said to any of the reserves that are interested in doing this, you're responsible for paying for those services. So they're paying for the chopper, they're paying for the crane truck, and they're paying for us to stay there and put a roof over our heads and feed us. In general, they've moved the elephants for years and years in South Africa. When Kruger was full, they'd move them to other reserves all around. And in general, they talk about crane truck, veterinary costs, and chopper. It costs about $1,000 per elephant to do that. And that's probably about what our costs are. Again, our time is really being donated. They don't have to pay for that. So it's the crane truck and chopper and things that cost the most.
So then Johan or whoever else you're training in Sisu is going to also be donating his time, or is he going to, you know, is the cost going to stay relatively similar?
Right now, I think the cost to them is more than it will be in the future because there's a bigger group that are coming over to have to do the training. They don't have to pay for our transportation to get over there, but we've probably, with this next trip, of close to 20, 30 people that will be training and being trained. And so in the future, it becomes a much more smaller core group that are in country, that drive and don't have to get on a plane and that type of thing. And you can then look at people coming in for a couple days and not having to take 2 weeks, and you can do a little bit more piecemeal too.
There have been studies that show evidence of post-traumatic stress syndrome in elephants in the wild,
I didn't know if ones you've radio collared, have you seen any evidence of increased aggression or something along the lines of post-traumatic stress from that level of contact with humans?
Interesting question, and part of what our researchers in the field have been looking at. So, for example, when the animals are radio collared, we have full-time elephant research observation folks at 2 of the reserves that we've been working at that have been looking for any signs of that, and they haven't detected any of that at all. To your point, there were a fair amount of studies that showed that in Kruger, when they were culling elephants, herds of elephants, that other elephants in the reserve seemed to know or something bad was going on with the other elephants. And for years they couldn't figure out how would they know. Now that we know more about elephant communication and their infrasound and how they can communicate literally through the ground through miles, there's a lot of people that theorize that those elephants were sending out a distress call when this was going on, the culling in their whole herd, and that other elephant herds would hear about it or something of that sort. Really hard to know exactly what's going on, but that was what people surmise.
Dr. Stetter, we have to take individual questions, but some of you probably have to go, so if we can give a collective thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you.